Hi, everybody. This is a Progressive Shortcake, and I'm Joe Firestone, your host. One of the most popular topics among you these days, I think, is modern monetary theory. I know there are many of you who come to see my live streams because you're interested, in MMT. I first got involved in MMT at the end of 2009 and early 2010. I was part of a team. I both conceived the idea and was part of a team of 6 people that organized the Fiscal Sustainability Teach-In Counter Conference on April 28th of 2010 in opposition to the Peterson Fiscal Summit, which was about austerity. 2010 was the first of their fiscal summits, and my group felt it was important to counter them with a summit that talked about the failings of austerity and an alternative to austerity economics. And we did this by conducting a one-day conference in which all of the speakers were people from the MMT school, of economics. And so that was when I got very, very heavily involved, in MMT, and I've been very heavily involved since that time. Now, there have been over the years many frustrations about advancing MMT, but there have been many signs, of progress too. And there seems little doubt that in the 10 years since then, that MMT has gotten now very much in the mainstream of debate about the public spending, the fundamentals, of macroeconomics and public finance, and that it is a contending school for the ear of decision makers and also people in Congress, and particularly media people and journalists. And I wanted to call your attention to one small sign of progress that had been made. There's an article that recently appeared. It was in the American Prospect, and it was by Robert Kuttner. Now, one reason why Robert Kuttner is significant here is because before the Fiscal Sustainability Conference in 2010, I was informed about the impending fiscal summit on April 9th of 2010 through an article in the Prospect written by Robert Kuttner at that particular time. And it was in response to that article that I got the idea for the Fiscal Sustainability Teach-In Counter Conference. So his article actually triggered our organization of the Fiscal Sustainability Teach-In Counter Conference. But he, at that time, was a tax and spend type of a progressive. He believed, at least in terms of his writings, that the federal government had to tax the rich in order to spend, in order to acquire the money to spend, and that the source of money for federal spending was people who had money, either by taxing their money away from them or by selling bonds to them. That was what you necessarily had to do to finance federal spending for the public purpose. Kuttner was very much then a conventional progressive with respect to macroeconomics. and he remained so for years and years thereafter. He was very much involved with people um, who, at the time of the fiscal cliff, were playing ball with the Peterson groups in developing alternative budgets to theirs, all of which were based not only on recommendations for spending, but on recommendations about how spending could be paid for with some sort of pay go program. He was very heavily involved in that, and he remained so over the years. But now it's August 24th, 2020, and he's retired as the executive editor of The Prospect. He used to be that now. And the current editor, Dave Dayen, is the current editor, as you know. We often go with a lot of his columns here. But Kuttner had a very brief piece and a good piece on August 24th, 2020, today that is. And he starts off, Joe Biden has heartened progressives with his calls for levels of public spending well into the trillions, equal to the urgent needs at hand. These include funds to address not just the pandemic, but climate change, student debt, the caring economy, and the need to invest in infrastructure and rebuild American supply chains and jobs. If you add up the proposals of Joe Biden, they total at least $3.5 trillion, and even more with commitments he added in his convention acceptance speech. So then Kuttner moves to what Ted Kaufman had to say in his interview with the Wall Street Journal. Ted Kaufman, as some of you know, is a very close advisor to Joe Biden. He was Biden's chief of staff for many years when Biden was in the Senate. And when Biden left the Senate, to become the vice president, he basically bequeathed his Senate seat for the remainder of his term to Kaufman. He got Kaufman appointed as the interim senator during that time. He was that close to Kaufman. Kuttner points out that Kaufman had said to the Wall Street Journal, when we get in, the pantry is going to be bare. We're going to have limited funds to do what we're going to do. And Bob Kuttner says Kaufman is the most progressive of Biden's inner circle. I'm not sure about that. Jared Bernstein may be the most progressive of his inner circle, but I may be mistaken in thinking that Bernstein is in his inner circle, but I also may not be, because Bernstein was his chief economist when he was the vice president, Joe Biden, that is. So, notably in directing these comments to the Journal, Kaufman was falling into the trap of thinking that financial markets needed to be reassured that his man was not one of those liberal spendthrifts. So then Kuttner says, so there you have it. Which Joe do we get? And then he goes on with some other considerations about what the Federal Reserve has done, and the fact that this has been on the monetary policy side, but not on the fiscal policy side. And then Robert Kuttner says, as he says, unless Biden breaks with fiscal orthodoxy and invests the scale of public funds that the crisis requires, short-term and long, the promise of a transformative, progressive presidency is over before it starts. And by the way, truer words were never written. And then after skipping a paragraph, Kuttner says, the New Yorker recently reported that Biden has been reading How Democracies Die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt. Good start. Now he needs to read Stephanie Kelton on the deficit myth. which is, of course, the most popular MMT book thus far written, and one that is on the economics bestseller list, okay, at this time, and that outlines the views of MMT economists, at least the core views anyway, of MMT economists on deficit spending. So he says now he needs to read Stephanie Kelton on the deficit myth, or better yet, appoint her to head the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. That is a key cabinet position for guiding the economy, or at least it could be within a Biden administration. Of course, chairperson of the National Economics Council is another key position. But to recommend her to be the head of OMB to Biden, coming from Kuttner, that represents a sea change in his views between 2010 and 2020. So Kuttner is now a supporter, okay, of MMT. And Dave Dayen, who also was more or less a conventional progressive in 2010 when he was writing for Fire Dog Lake, where I blogged a lot about MMT in the period 2010 until Fire Dog Lake got hacked and went down and came back as shadow proof, but just a shadow of its own self. But for years, Dave was blogging there with the news, and I was writing MMT tracts. And while other people blogged about MMT there, I was probably the leading MMT blogger there for years, and Dave undoubtedly saw my blogs. I don't know whether I had any influence in swaying him towards, an MMT view, because, of course, over the years, he had exposure to Stephanie and many other MMT or so. I don't want to claim credit, but I may have had some role in beginning on Dave Dayen's trip to MMT as well. Today, he is an MMT supporter. I don't know if I would say he's entirely consistent or on board with all, of MMT economics. Okay, I cannot say that, but he's certainly sympathetic, to MMT, and is also a supporter of the deficit myth as a book. So I'm saying that the migration of Kuttner, and of Dave Dayen, those are at least small signs that a tremendous amount of progress has been made by MMT in these 10 years. And I am extremely happy about that. I am ecstatic about that. It means we have reached the mainstream of the media. Now, we previously, there were things that published, in the New York Times and the LA Times and so on, Bloomberg, other major publications. But the American Prospect is a mainstream publication in the progressive sphere itself. And to have the Prospect basically go over to MMT with two of its main writers is very significant for the Washington progressive establishments, because the American Prospect writes for the think tanks in Washington, the progressive think tanks, who until recently have shared assumptions with places like the Peterson Foundation when it came to pay-go, when it came to austerity economics. They were fellow traveling with the enemies of the progressives. Now, I think that is increasingly not true. And so I'll leave you with that particular thought. This is not as long as some of the others. It's more of a short take. So thank you very much for coming. I will again show you the promo for Progressive Short Takes with patreon.com/show_Firestone. And I thank you very much for coming. And I'll see you soon with another Progressive Short Take. Good night.